was reading an article in a bulletin, and it went something like this. It said there were 3 little boys, and one of them's father had gone to a kindergarten class with him, and he was sitting there listening to the conversation between these 3 little boys, and one of them said that my dad is a doctor, and we have lots of money. We have a swimming pool and anything else that we want. And another little boy said, well, my dad is a lawyer, and he goes to the White House pretty often to give the president advice. And the other little boy thought and said, my daddy's here. Now you think about the difference in that, and you realize the point that's being made. Well, I got to thinking about something this morning. I guess thinking about it in part because Pat and I are expecting another grandchild in July, and Lindsay and James will provide that for us. And I got to thinking about something, and what I got to thinking about was, what are the 2 most important jobs on earth? Now, when I got to thinking about that, the reason I considered it is this. I often preach lessons that talk about the home being the basis of society. Now, you can argue all you like, but the fact is the foundational block of any successful civilization is the home. And if the homes in that country are not stable, then we have serious problems. And a lot of the problems that we have in our country today have to do with that very problem. I sometimes say that one of the difficulties in our country, now I've studied before polygamy. I've had lessons when I've talked about it, and I've gone back and I've looked at Abraham's family and looked at the problems that occur in Abraham's family because he had a multiplicity of wives. And I've looked back to Joseph's family. If you ever look at Joseph's family, it had terrible problems, but he had 4 wives. There were 4 separate families, and they were trying to coexist, and that was a problem. I think that's why God went on to say in the days of Jesus that in the beginning God's intent was that one man be married to one woman and they stay married for life. But God, because of the hardness of their heart, permitted divorce, and He also permitted polygamy. But it's not a good idea. It doesn't work well. And as I began to think about that, I realized that our nation has a problem too. It first came to me in a very dramatic way years ago. I was building a house for Pat's first cousin, actually. And was there on Friday, and a strange car pulls up in the driveway, and a man gets out, and 2 of the kids run out of the house and get in his car, and I didn't even realize they weren't his wife's children, his children. They were his wife's, but they were. And then I had another job going on in Mount Pleasant, and I get down there the next week, and we're doing a remodel job, and the same car that I'd seen the week before pulls in the driveway in Mount Pleasant, and a couple of kids run out of the house and get in the car, and I began to ask questions, and I realized that this man had children by this lady that lived in Columbia, we were building a house for, and also by the lady that lived in Mount Pleasant that we were remodeling a house for. And I began to realize that while we talk about polygamy and how dangerous it is, we practice in our country what I call practical polygamy. And that's what we have. We have practical polygamy. They're not married to each other, but there is a big problem there. And anybody that's ever been in the school system will tell you right quick that you can almost immediately identify a child from a traditional family that has a mother and a father living in the same home, raising the children that are biologically theirs. It's just the truth. You can deny it, you can throw a fit, you can say it's not so, but it is. The truth is that God was right. And God said that what we need is we need a husband and a wife, and when they have children, they raise their children. And that's the most important job that they have at the time. And the reason I say that is because that is the building block of every society, period. Now, I want to look with you for a few moments to some things, and I want you to think about it. If you ask the question, what are the 2 most important jobs on earth? Today, probably people would say the President and the Vice President of the United States, because the United States is, like it or not, the most powerful, most influential country in the world. The person who leads that nation is the most powerful person in the world. And the person who stands in the wings, 1 heartbeat away from that office, is the second most powerful person in the world. That's just the truth. You also realize that being a member of Congress or the Senate has tremendous ramifications. And they are very important people. You also understand that being a judge on the Supreme Court has tremendous implications in our lives. But I'm going to tell you something. When you look at all those tasks, and they're important tasks, there's still two tasks that have been around a lot longer, and God ranks them at the top of the list. Because stop and ask yourself the question. How many presidents have we had? Is this not the 45th? Is that correct? I believe that's right. This is the 45th president of the United States. If you look back and you think about that, that's over a period from actually, we didn't have a president in 1776. I don't really remember the first year that George Washington was elected the first president. I can't remember. Saw it the other day, but I forget the date. But it was around right before 1800. So we've had presidents for 220 some odd years, thereabout. But people have had parents since Adam and Eve were created. And they had the two sons that we read of, Caney and Abel, and then later others. Now, that's the truth. And we need to understand it. We need to realize that all the things that we've named, the President, the Vice President, Congress, and Senate, and Supreme Court, you know, the other day, and the reason I mention it is because I was listening to the press conference. They were announcing the Supreme Court nominee, and they were talking about, you know what they were talking about? They were talking about who his parents were and what they did and how much of an influence they've been in his life. Well, the truth is, if you look at anybody, that's going to be true. I don't care who they are. That's going to be the truth. So if you look at the president, the vice president, the congressmen, the senators, and the Supreme Court, all of them had parents. And the fact of the matter is that those parents had a great deal to do with who they are and what kind of character they possess. Now here's what I want to talk with you a little about. Man often looks at things and has a misconception of them. If you think about it, in 1 Corinthians 12, you've got a passage that talks about the Lord's church being a body. And you look at verse 22, and he said, those members of the body which seem to be more feeble are necessary. I've used this illustration quite often. Some of the greatest running backs in football have been sidelined for lengthy periods of time because they have what's called turf toe. Big toe has a problem. So here you have a big guy who weighs 230, 40 pounds in just tip-top physical shape. He cannot run the football because his big toe won't function properly. Now, that tells you what he's saying in this passage. But understand that he goes on to say this. Those members of the body which we think to be less honorable, upon these we bestow more abundant honor, and our uncomely parts have more abundant comeliness. In other words, he said, you know, sometimes the things we don't think about are really important. Now, I'm going to tell you, the problem that we have in any country, and it doesn't matter what country you're in, is politicians, all of them, always think in terms of, if we can spend enough money, we can solve a problem. And that's never true. That's never true. It's like we talked about in Bible class this morning. I don't care what problem you're talking about. The only way you solve a problem is solve attitudes. You can go to Chicago and all the problems that are in the news today, and the only way that's ever going to be solved is when you have some better homes that guide and direct people in a more stable way, and then they'll probably have a better situation. And you need to realize it. You can't minimize the importance of the home because it is the basic building block. It is the unit upon which everything else in a society is built. Now, I want to go a little bit further, and I want to talk with you a little bit from the book of Proverbs, because this is an interesting thing. Never underestimate the importance of a father and a mother. Ask me a question. Who is responsible for introducing us to the Lord and to His will for us? Who is it that's going to, I'm not saying teach us, instruct us, I'm saying introduce us. In the book of Proverbs chapter 1, verse 7 through 8, first thing he says is, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. And you know what the next verse says? My son, hear the instruction of thy father, and forsake not the law of thy mother. Next verse tells you where the beginning of that is. Who instigates that? If you think about it, when people are raised in homes where the Lord is valued, and you look at statistical information as to whether they will turn out to be faithful Christians or not all of them will, but that goes way up, kind of like Timothy. The faith was in Timothy, was first in his mother and his grandmother, and then was eventually in him. And you kind of understand that, and you realize that, and you realize what a great responsibility you have. Second thing is this. Who is the first person to teach us right from wrong? Well, in Proverbs chapter 4, hear you children the instruction of a father, attend to no understanding. For I give you good doctrine and forsake not my law. And this is a father speaking, this is not God. For I was my father's son, tender and only beloved in the sight of my mother. He taught me also and said unto me, let thine heart retain my words, keep my commandments and live. In this case, he's really talking about a family. He's saying, your parents have such a tremendous amount to do with learning the difference between right and wrong. I mean, if your parents don't teach you the difference in right and wrong, and as you progress in life, you kind of like a house without a foundation. In this part of the country, a lot of houses built without foundation. This church building didn't have one. All the problems we have with this floor that had to be corrected were corrected for one reason. There was no foundation here. That was the problem. And though we corrected it, Joe can tell you it wasn't easy. Once you don't have it in the beginning, it's a pretty tough job to correct that. And even when you do correct it, you look around and you look at some of the things where that window, and if you look, I'm being a builder, notice a lot more than you. Notice how that trim goes to a point there. Even though we've kind of corrected it, there's still some problems there that are just beyond correction. So you can't go back and just make it like it never happened when a child doesn't have that proper foundation put under them. Now, you may correct a lot of things, but they still have a basic problem there. And we need to understand it. And that's what the writer of the book of Proverbs is saying. In chapter 6, what principles will mold our character and influence who we are all of our lives? What is it that's going to make a tremendous difference in who we are and how we think? In chapter 6 and verse 20, he says this, my son, keep thy father's commandment, forsake not the law of thy mother. Bind them continually upon thine heart, tie them about thy neck. When thou goest, it shall lead thee. When thou sleepest, it shall keep thee. When thou awakest, it shall talk with thee. For the commandment is a lamp, and the law is light, and reproofs of wisdom are the way of life. It's not something that ends. It's something that continues. I don't think a lot of parents understand what long-lasting effects that whatever they do in their life will have. That what your children are, and a lot of things change in life, but still you kind of gave the original mold there. It's kind of like the old saying, as a twig is bent, so grows the tree. In our front yard, when we lived in the first house that we built here, was an interesting tree. It actually was a sassafras tree. And it grew in a very strange way. And I don't know if I've ever seen a tree actually grow like that. But it grew up, it turned over, it went back down, it went along the ground, and then came back up. And I would guess that at some point, probably another tree had fallen on it or something had happened. So unless our neighbors who have bought the house from us have cut the tree, and they might have, I don't know. But if they haven't cut the tree, it still looks like that. Now, how old is it? I don't know. When I was there, it was about that big around. I don't know how old a sassafras tree that big around would be. My guess is 40 or 50 years. Now it would be another 20 added to that, so about 70, I guess, as old as I am. And it is what it was meant to be in the beginning. It's kind of that way with raising children. Now, they may change a lot of things, but still, just our basic personality is pretty much developed. And we are kind of who we are. And our basic value systems, a great many times, they're formed there, and they're hard for us to overcome. And that's why the writer of Proverbs is emphasizing upon fathers and mothers how important it is that this is going to have such a long-lasting effect. Who suffers the most mental anguish when we stray from the right way? When children don't do the things that they ought to do, who is it that suffers the most from that? Proverbs 10 says this, a wise son maketh a glad father, but a foolish son is the heaviness of his mother. Treasures of wickedness profit nothing, but righteousness delivereth from death. Now, that's an interesting passage, and it just tells you You think about it. When you're a parent, as your children grow up, just think of the highs and the lows. What are the highs? When they do the things that really, as we say, make you proud. What are the lows? When sometimes they disappoint you. That's a low. And children need to understand that, and parents need to realize how important their influence is. What's interesting to me is that sometimes we see parents who can't figure out what's wrong. Sometimes parents do the best job they can and children rebel, and I understand that. That happens. Sometimes you see parents that don't do anything, don't control their children, and do anything they want to do, and then all of a sudden they can't figure out what went wrong. You know, we've got to understand something. It's a two-way street. We can be a bad parent, we can be a bad child. But the fact of the matter is, sometimes that doesn't equate 100%, but really we just need to give people the best chance possible. Let me tell you something. You know, you may live your life as a health nut, and some people do. Health nuts. I mean, they've done everything they can with their diet, their exercise. You may get cancer and die at 30. But the chances of that happening decrease as you do a better job with your life. That's true also. So just because you say, well, I might die anyway. I mean, we have to be careful. You might say, well, my children might not turn out well no matter how hard I work at it. Well, that's true. May not. But I'll tell you one thing. You have a lot to do with it, or can have, and you're going to give them the greatest opportunity by simply being the kind of parent you ought to be. And I really believe that a lot of people misunderstand this, and they don't realize the importance of it. And they kind of shuffle it out, just shuffle it out of their mind. They're like, well, this is not important. There are a lot of other things more important, just like in that original statement. One guy thought, you know, being a doctor is the most important thing. The other lawyer is the most important thing. One of them said, you know what, being a father is the most important thing. And we need to realize that. We need to understand it. We need to be careful we don't take the task of being a father and mother lightly. In 1 Samuel chapter 1, it's kind of interesting. You have Hannah who doesn't have any children, and she's been praying for children for years. And when you pray for the privilege of having a child, you also understand something. You're also accepting a tremendous responsibility. You know, when you say, I want to have a child, that's fine. But at the same time, with that great blessing comes a great responsibility. And she understood it. In the midst of this verse, she said this. She's praying to the Lord. And she said, you know, if you give me a child, I will give him unto the Lord all the days of his life. Now, of course, you know, she didn't really have the opportunity to do that. Samuel could have rebelled and said, I'm not going to serve the Lord. I understand that. But that was her intent. Her intent was to make sure that she would bring him up in the way he should go, and he would, when he was old, hopefully he'd not depart from him. That was her intent. That's what she wanted. She understood that was her responsibility. How many parents today you think understand that responsibility? In our nation, as I watch the news and listen to the various programs that I see, it's emphasized to me over and over and over and over why we have the problems we have. You do realize that 40-some-odd% of children born in the United States are not born into a two-parent family. And a great many of them, I mean, I don't even know how to put it. I don't even know what to say. It's like Pat and I said, you know, really, they have no chance. Now, hopefully I'm wrong, and hopefully something will happen, and they can be turned. But generally speaking, that doesn't happen. I mean, we just have problems, and the problems is that the problem stems from the fact that we don't act like Hannah, and we don't have this attitude. You know what? I want to make sure that my child has a relationship with God. That's my number one priority. Now, think about this. You know, there are verses I read so much that sometimes you probably tire of hearing me read them. But I was trying my best this morning to just not put this in the morning lesson, you know. But I just can't avoid it. He said, except the Lord build the house. And he's not talking about building a physical structure, by the way. That's not what he's talking about. They labor in vain that build it. Except the Lord keep the city. The watchman waketh but in vain. It is vain for you to rise up early, to sit up late, to eat the bread of sorrows. For so he giveth his beloved sleep. Children are an heritage of the Lord, and the fruit of the womb is his reward. If you're talking about building a home, here's the attitude you need to have. As heirs are in the hand of a mighty man, so are children of the youth. Happy is the man that hath his quiver full of them. They shall not be ashamed, but they shall speak with the enemies in the gate. But as we mentioned last week, and when we were talking about the same passage in a different context, the problem is that heirs are basically tools to accomplish a purpose. Any tool that you have, sometimes I buy tools and I have great ambitions about things I'm going to do. I don't ever take them out of the box. They accomplish nothing. Any tool that you have has to be used for the purpose for which you have it. He uses children here as heirs. And as I talked about last week, the main principle of an heir is the heir has to be aimed and given direction. Now, can things happen to deflect it? Sure. Puff of wind, a tree limb blow across, a lot of things can happen. But if you don't give it any aim at all, then you have a serious problem. And parents need to understand that. In the state of Tennessee, for several years they've had where you can have the privilege of carrying a firearm. You get a gun carry permit. But to get one, you have to go to class, learn how to use the tool, because that's what it is. You have to have a background check, make sure you have enough mental stability to actually be entrusted with that. But unfortunately, we don't do that with children. Anybody who wants to can have a child. And a lot of folks have them that don't want them. And it shows because they don't want to control them. And it's a real problem. And we need to understand it. We need to realize, if you're a parent, you have a grave responsibility. Grave responsibility. And everybody needs to understand it. Now, be careful we don't overstep that. Be careful. I know that a lot of people like to say every time a child fails, the parent's fault. That's not true. Not true. I understand that children are free moral agents. And you read Ezekiel chapter 18 and it'll tell you that the son doesn't bear the iniquity of the father and the father doesn't bear the iniquity of the son. There's some distinction there. But be careful to give them the best chance they possibly can have. And if they fail, let it be despite your best efforts and not because you didn't give them. And that's really the problem that we need to get into. One of the problems we also need to understand is this. We often think about parenting as being providing for. And most of the time, if we're not careful, we think of providing for in a physical sense. 1 Timothy 5:8 is actually talking about that. And he said, if any man provide not for his own, and here he's talking about physical things, especially those of his own house, he hath denied the faith and is worse than an infidel. He says a person who will not take care of the physical needs of his family is guilty of sin. We need to recognize that. We need to understand it. A person too sorry to take care of them has a problem with God. But that's not the only thing he says. Sometimes we act like that's the only obligation we have. That's like, I still think sometimes about that old song, and I listen to it. Sometimes it still kind of bothers me a little bit about, the guy talking about, I believe the title is, it doesn't make much sense to me, but I think The Cat's in the Cradle. Is that what it is? But at any rate, it talks about it, and it talks about a father who didn't have any use for his child, didn't spend any time with him, and he couldn't figure out what happened. Well, God said in Ephesians 6:4, and I've often say this because it seems to me that over the years that we fathers probably have borne the brunt of the criticism. Mothers are generally, have been traditionally more involved with their children than fathers. But God didn't say this to mothers. He said this to fathers. He said, ye fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord. Too many times, a lot of fathers are kind of content to say, okay, I brought home a paycheck, and here's the money. Now, you take care of the situation. And that's the problem, because when that happens, children are deprived of something they need. It's kind of like, if you think about it, most people eat foods that provide needed nutrients. The problem is that a lot of times we don't eat foods that provide all the needed nutrients. So we eat this that really provides something we really need, but then there's something missing. So we have a vitamin deficiency. Sometimes we have a parent deficiency. We may have one parent who's really struggling and trying and putting forth the effort, and the other that's kind of, not my problem. Well, let me tell you something. God tells us that fathers and mothers have to remember something. They're partners. They're partners. And we have to understand that. We have to understand that we have equal responsibility. I mean, we've both got our parts to play. And the fact is that, we're involved in a great work. This is the foundation of society. I've said before, if we wanted to do one thing that would improve any situation anywhere, improve the family, and immediately every situation changes tremendously, without question. But the problem you get into is this. Moral values and spiritual values are things that are not valued. That's the problem. That's our problem. They're not valued. What is valued would be political, financial, material, fleshly things. That's what's valued. And we don't value the moral, and we don't value the spiritual. You know something that I've thought about a lot of times that bothers me is I watch so many programs on television where a child has a problem, and the problem is almost always they have a parent who believes in moral and spiritual values, and they believe that's oppressive and that's created a problem. Well, I want to tell you something. You just look around you and just give it some thought and just think about it. Parents, you have a tremendous, tremendous responsibility. When I look back, all of my children are grown. And whatever influence I had has been exerted. And I would prefer that you not ask them how well I did. Because they probably can tell you a lot of things, a lot of shortcomings, a lot of problems, a lot of things they saw that weren't right. So sometimes when they do right, it's in spite of us and not because of us. But understand that if we pay a little attention to it, one of the first things that has to be done with any situation, no matter what you're talking about, is a recognition of responsibility. And until we do that, we never do well with it. As long as we never understand what our responsibility is, we don't do well with it. The moment we understand that God has given us a grand privilege, but understand something, with every privilege comes responsibility, every single time. What is the grandest event in the life of most children in the United States today? I would think that almost universally it would be the day that you turn 16 and get your driver's license. That probably is the grandest event in most people's life because that gives you freedom that you never enjoyed before. When a child gets 16 and gets a driver's license, if you're a parent, boy or girl, but boy especially, and you get your first bill from the insurance company. First time you get a bill from the insurance company and your child just turned 16 and now they're driving a car and they're on one of your cars. You get that first bill, you get a rude awakening. Because you know what the problem is? That child doesn't understand the responsibility of driving a car. They understand the privilege of it. They don't understand the responsibility of it. And that's the truth. I mean, why do you think that you have so many accidents with younger people as opposed to older people? Their reflexes are better than ours. Their education may be better than ours. Their health generally may be better than ours. So theoretically, they ought to be much better drivers than we older folks. But statistically, they are not. You know what the difference is? You understand the responsibility. You understand what's involved. They really don't. They don't really realize what a tremendous responsibility they've undertaken. If parents, fathers, and mothers would just understand this is a great responsibility, and I'm willing to accept it, things would be better. The Lord teaches that over and over and over again. But you know, I heard a story one time. I was telling Tim Bryan about it Saturday. There was a fellow in Texas several years ago who tried to kill himself. He shot himself in the head 13 times with a nail gun. 13 times. I think sometimes parents are like that. We don't really realize what's going on here. Don't really realize things, and we kind of let problems get out of hand if we're not careful because we just don't understand the importance of it, the responsibility of it. Just wake up and understand what a grand privilege you have being a parent. God has entrusted to you a human being who has a soul. And you're going to have more to do with that forming of that human being than any other person on earth. We're going to sing a song of encouragement. And we've not had a first principle lesson, I realize it. I've had lessons like this on my mind for quite a while. I hadn't preached it, but finally got around to it. And I think it's something terribly important. And we have a lot of young parents here, and some parents to be, and there are others in years to come that are going to be parents that you're going to have influence about dictating their attitudes toward parenthood. This is actually an ongoing thing. You know, when you read Ecclesiastes 1, we talked about that many times. One generation passes, another comes on the scene. They're pretty much prepared for their job by the first generation that came before them. So it's kind of an ongoing thing. Just give it some thought. If you need to repent and be baptized, we certainly encourage you to do that. If as a parent you need to make corrections in your life as a parent, then that's between you and God. You need to do that. But if you do need to make some correction in your life or some public thing that needs to be made known, then certainly we encourage you to do that as together we stand as we sing.